Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Riaz Hussain. I work for the Australian Payments Network in Australia, better known as AusPayNet. I have two parts to my role. My first role is I'm responsible for payment standards in Australia, and secondly, I oversee change programs in Australia that relate to payments for the industry, and I am the sponsor for the AES migration program in Australia. Okay, I've got a few slides, and from my perspective, I'm just going to talk through really the rationale for migrating to AES, not necessarily lots of technical detail. My colleague at Bancaires will cover probably a lot more of the technical detail in terms of the experience in France to migrate to AES. So for Australia, what's the case for change? So to summarise, we believe that migrating to AES is inevitable and necessary. The primary concern for us is our national card payment system and transaction integrity. Whilst there's been a lot of, I suppose, publicity around the compromise of TDES with quantum computing, our concern primarily is not just that, it's also classical computing being able to break TDES as well. The migration itself, from our assessment, is pretty complex. There are a lot of participants in the payment system, covering banks, issuers, acquirers, vendors and manufacturers, as well as domestic and international schemes, or as brands. There has been, obviously, in certain countries, the deprecation of TDES already. In the US, I think from a government perspective, that was deprecated in January of this year for government departments, and other countries are taking a similar approach. There is a risk around store now, decrypt later. However, we feel that's probably less of a concern for all participants in the payment system, primarily around merchants that have a kind of card on file arrangement where there could be some concern. We've also assessed the alternative paths to address this risk, but we believe those options only extend the risk itself. We did quite a bit of analysis around the one-step versus two-step approach, i.e. TDES to TDES with key blocks, and then AES with key blocks. We just felt that the costs to the industry in Australia of taking a two-step approach versus a one-step approach just really didn't make sense. Now, whilst the timing of TDES being compromised isn't completely clear, our research and discussion with a number of key experts in the industry has indicated that there's around a 50% chance that TDES will be broken by about 2031. That's kind of where the consensus appears to be. Next slide. Okay, so what are the first steps in terms of migrating to AES? So we began our program 2 years ago to reach this point today, and I'll cover off some of the phases a bit later in the slides. So really the first thing that we focused on is the technical blueprint for AES. So what's the target state that we want to align all participants of the card payment system on? What we've done is taken a layered approach to that blueprint, being really careful around what we're targeting to be migrated and keeping away from PCI DSS and EMV considerations as well. So there is actually a layered model in our target state, technical target state for AES. We want to just also focus not just on the message itself, but actually all the way through in terms of message, pin block encryption. So it's actually looking at the whole transaction path that we're trying to address in terms of that risk. And we also obviously want to prepare for the dawn of quantum computing in a realistic way as well. So we've leveraged international standards to do this, but there are gaps, and we've had to focus on providing some guidance to certain participants of the card payment system to address, as well as using a limited amount of local standardization to address those gaps as well. Next slide. So in terms of the context of migrating to AES, we've had several discussions and a continuous engagement with both federal government and our Reserve Bank, and we've essentially got full support from those key entities. For those of you that are outside of Australia, let me just talk through some of this. So our Australian Signals Directorate is essentially our national security agency for Australia. We have had extensive discussions with them, and our program pretty much aligns with their view of the national card payment system being critical infrastructure for the nation. We're also included in the cybersecurity strategy that's published by Home Affairs, and there has been public support from the Reserve Bank around this program as well. We held a member survey in April of this year, and as you can see on the stats, we achieved about 90%, 7%, 94% support for the program from members, and only 6% are neutral. There were no dissenters. So what we took away from that is there is broad, strong support to do this migration itself. We're leading the industry program in conjunction with participants, projects and programs as well. So we're aligning all of that from an industry perspective in terms of key milestone dates and the approach to the migration itself. We commenced phase one about 18 months ago, and that's due to be completed at the end of this year. We'll then move into, and phase one has really been focused on development of some key artifacts, which I'll talk about in a sec. And phase two in 2025 is going to be focused on establishing the preparations to run an industry-wide pilot around AES, but being able to do that pilot and actually test coexistence with TDES as well, which is going to be a key component for the migration. So what have we done in phase one over the last 18 months? We've developed a technical blueprint for AES with all participants of the payment system. We've also developed an industry migration strategy, which is not a lockstep approach to the migration, but allows some flexibility around timing and investment to migrate to AES as well. And also developed some industry testing strategies and certification. So we really want to make sure that we understand when you're done in terms of your migration, there is evidence and there is confirmation that that migration has been completed. So the issues and challenges that we've had, the first one is around timing and pace, because any program like this is a significant investment for all concerned, and establishing those sunrise and sunset dates is also key. So when I talk about a sunrise date, it's really around where all devices on the card payment system need to not just be capable of supporting AES, but enabled to be enabled to support AES as well going forward. Sunset dates is really focused on the sunset of TDES, although we see potentially a long tail in that, particularly in the ATM environment. ATMs themselves, there are some challenges in that space, given the decline of cash and the business models around that. So we need to make sure that that's taken into account as part of the migration itself. We've already talked about some of those gaps around international standards and the need to address some of those gaps with national standards. In terms of mandates, global mandates, international mandates, our members in that survey in April considered the current level of mandates are a little not sufficient. So that's something that we picked up as part of our survey. So what are the key lessons that we learned as part of our migration so far? Focus on the technical blueprint early. That really drives confidence in the participants' ability to be able to migrate to AES, particularly for those manufacturers and vendors that have a long lead time, potentially in certain cases, to be able to support AES. Align your migration to natural asset refresh cycles. So things like we have certain members that are investing significantly in upgrading their payment switches or migration of their payment switches. That's a significant investment, and we need to make sure that we've got not a lockstep approach to this migration, but there needs to be some flexibility. One of the quick wins, taking a risk-based approach to the migration, is to upgrade your transport layer early, because that's where the concentration of risk potentially is. So focus on key elements where you can get some quick wins and reduce your level of risk by focusing on those areas. And as I mentioned earlier, testing and certification is key. That's it. I'm going to hand you across to Guillaume.
Thank you, Riaz. So thank you for this first part of the presentation. So for the French case study, I will also give a little bit of context regarding our domestic context. And then I will jump to the details of what we achieved in France. So regarding our context, and you know in France we have some regulation. We have this French governmental agency. No, please, the slide before. Thank you very much. So we have this French governmental agency for cybersecurity, which is the ANSSI, which publishes recommendations on cryptographic mechanism, key lengths, and which also promotes transitioning to the post-quantum cryptography, and thus supports, of course, recommends the use of the AES primitive. We also have La Banque de France, which is our closest and direct regulator. Banque de France is currently assessing the impact of the quantum threat on the payment systems. And in that sense, Banque de France really pushes and supports migration to the AES. And last but not least, we have the French banks, which are our members, and which are also pushing a lot for a migration to the AES. As you may know, banks have several activities, and it might be the case that in some of their activities, they already implement 128-bit security. So they would like to have some kind of uniform security, so pushing up the security level of payment industry. And we have even more regulation at the European level, but I won't go into the detail today. So what we achieved in France regarding this migration. So first, we have launched a project on June 2020, focusing on the online PIN verification functionality. So when you want to check your PIN code online, what you do is that, what the system does is that the PIN code is encrypted by the point of interaction, either during withdrawal or during a proximity payment. Once encrypted, the PIN block is transmitted to the merchant's bank, the acquirer, and then transmitted through what we call the interbank network to the issuer for verification. And then the issuer answers back whether the PIN is okay or not. So what we did is that we have migrated this interbank network that we called ERSB in France. We have completely migrated this network to the AES, and we are currently removing all our TDS keys. So it represents more than 300 servers that have been updated on the acquirer, network, and issuer side. Regarding the acceptance domain, so here where you have terminals in the field, we have updated our rules for approval so that any newly approved terminal must be AES ready since January 2022. Okay, so it means that any new terminal must be able to encrypt the PIN code using the AES primitive. And secondly, and probably most importantly, this terminal must come with a remote key loading solution that is able to push AES keys towards the terminals which are in the field. Okay? So today, depending on the type of terminal we're talking about, we have between 80 and 90% of our terminals which are AES ready. So now, on the issuer side, the issuer servers are receiving AES PIN blocks and are able to decrypt those PIN blocks directly using the AES primitive. There's no longer need to translate into TDS and then decrypt into TDS and then verify. No, everything is done using the AES primitive. So today, when you perform an online PIN verification, your PIN code takes a path that is either AES ready or fully AES. So I don't know if thank you. So the issues and the challenges that we are currently facing to make this migration broader is, as mentioned, Riaz, the lack of international regulation. Okay, some manufacturers are using this to delay their IES implementation to their 2030 roadmap. So knowing that it takes a long time to migrate terminals which are in the field, probably between 7 and 10 years, and probably even more, I think we agree that this might be an issue. Regarding the lessons that we learned from this program, well, again, we learned that regulation is key because at the time when we launched this project, so on June 2020, we were relying on this PCI PIN version 3.0, which still was providing some, let's say, some clear milestones regarding migration to the AES. So we deeply rely on that. And it really helped us, as well as the members, to obtain budget and engagement. The second lesson we learned is that it's probably a good idea to combine migration as Riaz, you mentioned it. So we have combined migration to AES and migration to key blocks. It was concerning the same devices, the same protocols, the same firmwares, so it reduced costs. And last but not least, it's a good idea as well to migrate end-to-end functions of your system. In our case, it was the online PIN verification functionality. So why is it useful? Because first, it makes the perimeter very clear. So while you are managing the project, it's clear for everyone what we have to do. And second, because you are targeting or you are crossing different subdomains, in fact, you are initiating the migration to AES in all those subdomains. So you are preparing for the future. Okay, so to conclude, I would say that we all have a long-standing experience in cryptography and cryptanalysis. And if we look back at history, cryptography is punctuated by breakthrough, sometimes at the advantage of cryptographers, sometimes at the advantage of cryptanalysts. So we know that crypto system never lasts forever. And we should not be surprised and even not be reluctant to move to this new standard, which is the AES. Okay? It has been providing us a stable, a long period of stability for more than 40 years. So, okay, now time is over. We have to move to the next state-of-the-art crypto system. And we are lucky because we are able to anticipate the future win of the quantum attacker. Usually, when you are the user of a crypto system, you are the very last person to be aware that the fact that your crypto system is broken. But we know in advance that our crypto system will be broken by the quantum computer. So we are lucky for that. We are so lucky because this AES primitive will allow you and us to pass, at least partially, it will not solve all the problems, but at least partially, it will allow us to pass this year to quantum. So together with the Australian Payment Network, we think that it is time to move to AES and probably more globally to move to a minimum of 128-bit security strength. And as mentioned, Riaz, probably a quick win, is to move your TLS links to quantum safe cipher suite, using hybridization techniques. So we reached the end of our presentation. Thank you for listening.